It's daunting standing here. Those of you who have done it already, but can I assure you, it's nothing in terms of the audience I had 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to talk to you about the audience that I had 2 weeks ago as a way of speaking about my work. They too were highly critical. They too were very wise people. They were 4 and 5 years old and very demanding as an audience. I was on the island of Maui in Hawaii, and I was working with children who had been impacted by the fires in Lahaina. I was in Hawaii at the invitation of the Maui Arts Centre, who had been involved as first responders, working almost immediately in the disaster zone of an extraordinary event which brought together many of the features of the permacrisis, a 1 in 100 year storm event, global capitalism which had stripped that part of the island from much of what it needed to sustain itself, a wetland that had turned into a dry land, it had many of those features. And the artists of the Maui Arts Centre had been invited in by both state and federal government to work with the children and the families who had been displaced by the fires. And I had begun my work with the Centre for the Arts and Social Transformation at the University of Auckland almost immediately with those artists, providing advice, support and mentoring, using the research that we had been doing for nearly 30 years, stretching back to our work in Sichuan, working with the artists who'd worked in Sichuan in the 2008 earthquake, our work in Christchurch in 2011, our work in Mexico City after earthquakes, our work in the fires in Australia, the floods, COVID, the terror attack in Christchurch. We had built an understanding of the possibilities, the limitations, and the chances that are available for communal and individual healing through the arts after disaster. So I went with, we were invited, a team of 4 of us, to visit Hawaii for the week, and we spent our time, and I had the great pleasure and privilege of working with children who had been deeply impacted by the fire alongside their mums and their dads and their grandparents and wider community. I start, as I always start with 4 and 5 year olds, by asking them to warm up their imagination because I'm going to tell them a story. So this is the interactive part of the day for you. I'm going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just warm up your imagination with me. And it's really simple. All you need to do, 4-year-olds can do this, so fellows of the Royal Society can certainly manage it, I would hope. Put your hands out in front of you. Rub your hands till they're warm, and when I count down, we're going to find out where the Royal Society keeps its imagination. Are you ready? Put it where you think you keep your imagination in your body, if that's where you keep it. 3, 2, 1, go. Where do you keep your some people are going, oh, I used to have some. Oh my God, how terrifying. I have done it at the Ministry of Education, and they said we don't do that anymore. But I'm not saying when I did it, but the children do much of what you did when I work with them, and I've been doing this for years in disaster zones, where the kids keep their imagination. And why is it important for children to find their imagination after disaster? Well, the imagination is really the thing which binds us, I think, together as a society. At one level, scientists and artists share something: the imagination, the ability to imagine the world differently. And we use our curiosity to resolve those questions. I'm one of the few artists who stands before you, elected into the Academy. But when I listen to scientists, when I've listened to what's been said today, it's the same innate desire to make a difference in the world, based on using the rigour of our research to make the difference. I don't feel so different in the work that I do to the work that I've heard through the day. And those little ones, the imagination is what they use to make sense of the world. When you're 3, how do you work out who your mum is? You work out who your mum is not by doing a research project on Google. I've done my research about what mums are. What you do is really simple. You imagine what it is to be her. You literally go into your mum's bedroom, put on the slippers, and you don't just stand there. You dance in your mum's slippers. And you imagine who your mum is. You imagine what your relationship to her is. And that's the power that we unleash when we work in the arts in disaster zones. Imagine if we thought the world was fixed. Not fixed as in not broken, but fixed. This is as good as it gets. And after disasters, that's often what children imagine, and not just children. But freeing the imagination to imagine something other, that's vital to us all. And no more vital than in disaster zones. Other children do this. Part of the work that we do in the Centre for Arts and Social Transformation is the link between the imagination and the arts and mental health. Those links and the studies are just enormous. 3,000 studies undertaken by the World Health Organization, a meta-analysis done 3 years ago which links the arts and what happens with the arts in terms of mental health. If you want to live longer, you can do exactly what Rod told us about in terms of hypertension, but you can also fully immerse and engage yourself in the arts. You will live not only longer, but you'll live a better life. The evidence is there. It's clear. Others of you did this. I saw, Kathy, you did this. Your imagination sits between your head and your heart. That's the glorious thing about being a researcher. It exists in the space in between. One of the things about the arts that I'm very conscious of, and maybe the thing that separates us, scientists and artists, is that we engage with the world first here and then make sense of it there, or make sense of it in the space in between. And that's what we take to children. The extraordinary possibilities of singing with children in a disaster zone and the healing that happens when you get the chance to sing together, to imagine, to live in the moment, to be distracted from the ugliness of the world by singing alongside somebody else. That's the glory of the work that we were doing in Lahaina. I told you I was going to tell you a story, but I got so excited by where the Royal Society keeps its imagination. It's just wonderful. Other children do this in their tummies. And the imagination feeds us. It's what sustains us. When we go to work and we do our research, it's the imagination that's firing. What if? I'm curious about this. What if I take the risk with that? What if I do this? The as if, the what if of life sustains us all as researchers. My favourite, though, was the 4-year-old who, when I asked him many, many, many years ago, went, and I said, you keep your imagination in your legs? And he said, yes, Peter, I'm a dancer. And there is the sense of the body. And children after disasters, and I've spent many years now working with children in many disaster zones, they lose their connection to themselves, they lose their connection to each other, and they lose their connection with the body. And there's lots of research that suggests that. So when you take the arts back in, we work through the senses, we work through the body, we do those kinds of things with children. Told you I'd tell you a story. How am I going for time? Minute and a half. It's a really quick story. Are your imaginations warm? Whoa! One more time. 3, 2, 1. Put it where it's... Yeah, good. Some of you worked out. You still got it. Wonderful. So I arrived, and instead of telling a story, I turned up with these beautiful 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and I was the man who puts the rainbow back in the sky after a storm. And I said to them, would you like to see my rainbow in my bag? And I opened it up for them, and it was gone. And they looked absolutely shocked, which was what I was aiming for. And I asked them, would you like to help me? And the lovely thing when you ask 3 and 4-year-olds if they'd like to help someone, they don't go, oh no, it will create a culture of dependency. Oh, are you allowed to still say that? But they go, yes, we can help, because 3 and 4-year-olds, if you ask your PhD student, they say, oh no, not qualified. But 3 and 4-year-olds believe they can make a difference in the world still. And that's what you pick up on when you work with them. So they said, yes, we'll help you, Peter. we had hidden large pieces of the rainbow as cloths around the Maui Arts Centre. So I led all these 3 and 4 year olds and their mums and their nannies and aunties, and we found pieces of the rainbow, large pieces of cloth, but unfortunately they needed to be stitched together. So we sat together and stitched the rainbow and talked about what that might be. You see, the thing about children and us as humans is we understand metaphor. We know what it is to be lacking the beauty, the joy and the wonder of the colours of the rainbow, and how awful it would be to lose that, and how important it would be to help someone get it back. And that's what they did. We stitched it together, we carried it back. We actually flew on it for a little while as well, because you can fly on rainbows when you're 3 and 4 or you're a professor like me. And we sat on the rainbow and we flew back, and then they stuffed it back in the bag. That night we were at the beach, and this glorious rainbow just appeared in the sky. Went back to the centre the next morning, and one of the mums who works in the centre, she came up and she said, "Tera, my daughter, she looked at the sky last night and she said, 'Look, Mum, that rainbow we helped Uncle Peter put back, it's there.'" Hope, the imagination, metaphor, children. I get paid to do it. Thank you very much.
I've been to many talks in the Royal Society over the years, and I've never seen one with no slides. And it's one of two that brought a tear to my eye. I don't want to talk about the other one. And so thank you very much for that. It was absolutely delightful. I'm sure somebody has a question, so go on.
I think it's wonderful to hear these stories of children and the work you do with children. What about adults? How receptive are adults to healing through the arts?
I've spent much of my life working in prisons and psychiatric hospitals, and I've been working with all sorts of people. You know, there's something about the way in which, instead of our imaginations being warmed, they often get killed. But it doesn't take much to spark them again for people. People so excited about it. Started working with a celebration choir. Gorgeous. How do you see yourself as not a person who's had a stroke, but see yourself as an artist? And what difference does that make in your life? It's enormous. And plenty of research to talk about what's happening in terms of the neuroscience. But you start listening to the stories that people tell. I spent a lot of work in prisons. You know, the purpose for me of doing the arts in the prison is not to rehabilitate the prisoners, but to rehabilitate the prison. Because that's the bit that needs to be fixed.
Thank you. I could be a bit cheeky and say, well, adults, but more specifically, what about politicians and government? I'm serious, and as an observer of what happened at international level with respect to the global environmental crisis, the first official report that came out of the UN, the famous Brundtland report, talked in its very first sentences about the incredible impact that we will see when Earth is being seen for what it is. Earth is obviously something beautiful, a marble. You know, 1972 we are talking, the first summit was then, and then 20 years later, the prediction, and I hold to it, the prediction that the Earth will be the biggest image that the humanity will ever sort of experience. This kind of rather imaginative sort of leadership by the United Nations was carried forward in no less than 27 international agreements. States are quite capable to put something on paper saying we as states have a responsibility to cooperate to preserve the integrity of the Earth system. They keep saying this, and of course nothing ever happened. But you as the expert here, right? I mean,
the
yes,
4-year-olds are the genuine experts on this.
if this traction of young people and the imagination that we associate with students and so forth, is there some argument to sort of conclude that over time the image of the Earth, which is brand new, right, 50 years, will change us?
If we connect the word imagination to image, I think you absolutely have that connection, which is so vital and important. But I would argue this. Kant says hope is a moral obligation. And so why do I work for 30 years in disaster zones? Not because the evidence tells me it makes any difference. I don't work in those disaster zones believing that I'm changing the lives of the people I'm working with. But I might just make life more bearable while we live it. And that might be enough. And I don't know if that's about all any of us can aim for.
I think we'll